So when Tammy and the team and I were putting this thing together today, this beautiful Palms and Passion celebration, at first the sermon was a sung piece called Who May Abide the Day of His Coming. That's going to come at Pentecost instead of today. So this is called The March Continues, and I will not be singing it. I will not be singing it. Dress right dress. Dress right dress. That's what they call it. The command. To stand directly behind the person in front of you, directly next to the woman to your right. Put your left hand out in front, eyes right. Check to make sure that you're in the right formation. This is what my brother Ron learned how to do on registration day, our day, the first day at West Point. I drove him there, waited while he got his head shaved and lost the hot fade that he had in those days, waited while he rehearsed learning how to march on the parade ground with his new crew, in formation, strong, no exposed flank, like the soldiers in the Civil War, like soldiers in ancient Roman times. Step together, because if you get out of step, you expose yourself and expose someone else. You make the greater whole vulnerable. When we were in Selma 3 weeks ago preparing to march across the Pettus Memorial Bridge, I overheard a man standing in front of some masons. Dress right, dress. He said, put your hand out in front and spread yourself out. That's right, stay in step. It took 3 weeks and 3 events, and then they did it. Another crew, Martin King, John Lewis, a formation of peaceful protesters. On Bloody Sunday, March 7, 1965, some 600 civil rights marchers headed east out of Selma on Route 80. They got only as far as the Pettus Bridge, some 6 blocks away, where state and local lawmen attacked them with billy clubs and tear gas and drove them back into Selma. 2 days later, on March 9th, Martin King Jr. again took a group of marchers onto the bridge and then knelt there, praying, and turned around. Then civil rights leaders sought court protection for a third full-scale march from Selma to the state capitol in Montgomery. Federal District Judge Frank Johnson Jr. weighed the right of mobility against the right to march and ruled in favor of the demonstrators. Oh yes, he said it was right for them to shut it down. The law is clear, he said, that the right to petition one's government for the redress of grievances may be exercised in large groups. And these rights might be exercised by marching, even in public highways. And so it was that on March 21, about 3,200 marchers now set out of Montgomery, walking 12 miles a day and sleeping in fields along the way. By March 25, they were 25,000 marchers strong. And less than 5 months after that, President Lyndon Johnson signs the Voting Rights Act into law, the best possible redress, I think, of those grievances. They had marched before, and they would march again. They marched to work, boycotting buses, traveling in their LPC, that would be their leather personal carriers, their shoes, tired, marching for themselves, for their grandchildren, marching for freedom, marching against tyranny. Oh, they marched in Chicago. They marched for economic justice for sanitation workers. They marched on the Mall in Washington to claim God's dream of justice as their own. They marched in their own formation, this time arms linked to make for safety, singing songs like We Shall Overcome, dressed in the uniform of their choice, their Sunday best. Might have been the only good dress they had or the only suit of clothes they owned, but they put it on in their black patent leather shoes and traded out their uniforms for one expressing dignity. Those pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem for the Passover, they were marching too. Oh, okay, someone might have said it was a parade because there had been parades. Every time dignitaries came into town, every time a new governor got elected or a new king got crowned, they'd have a parade and run alongside the special people, singing songs and psalms and waving palm branches and sort of making a spectacle of themselves, tossing their clothes on the ground. Somebody might have even called them a mob, rabble-rousers, malcontents, troublemakers, out of control, maybe even dangerous. But I think it was a march. This was a march against tyranny, a march against oppression. This was a march against the so-called Pax Romana, which was no Roman peace at all, but Roman terrorism. It was a march against poverty, a march against being overly taxed with no representation and no vote. This was a march, friends, against corruption, a march against how resources were being used, a march, an ethical spectacle, if you will, of the poor, the disenfranchised, the outcast, and the aliens, a march featuring women and children, a march featuring enslaved people, a march featuring those who others considered sinners, a march, oh yes, and they were discontent. And they were troublemakers, as in make trouble to pull down the powers and principalities, as in make trouble against oppression, as in willing to do the outrageous, the unspeakable, the dramatic, the ethical spectacle, as in trouble the waters to heal the world. And they were dangerous. They were dangerous as in impactful, peaceful, but impactful. They were willing to make an ethical spectacle in the face of danger to disrupt oppression. Like Martin King. Like Martin Luther King Jr., who in his autobiography wrote about the protest and the bus protest. Almost immediately after the protest started, we had begun to receive threatening telephone calls and letters. And these increased, he wrote, as time went on. By the middle of January, they had risen to 30, maybe 40 calls a day. From the beginning of the protest, both my parents and Coretta's parents always had the unconscious and even conscious fear that something fatal might befall us. They never had any doubt about the rightness of our actions, but they were concerned about what might happen to us. My father made a beaten path between Atlanta and Montgomery throughout the days of the protest. And every time I saw him, I went through a deep feeling of anxiety because I knew that my every move was driving my father deeper and deeper into a state of worry. During those days, he could hardly mention the many harassments that Coretta, the baby, and I were subjected to without shedding tears. As the weeks passed, I began to see that many of the threats were in earnest. Soon I felt myself faltering, King wrote, and growing in fear. One day, a white friend told me that he had heard from reliable sources that plans were being made to take my life. And so for the first time, I realized that something could happen to me. One night, at a mass meeting, I found myself saying, if one day you find me sprawled out dead, I do not want you to retaliate with a single act of violence. I urge you to keep protesting with the same dignity and discipline you have shown so far. A strange silence came over the audience. One night toward the end of January, I settled into bed late after a strenuous day. Coretta had already fallen asleep, and just as I was about to doze off, the phone rang. An angry voice said, listen, nigger, we've taken all we're going to take from you. Before next week, you'll be sorry you ever came to Montgomery. I hung up, but I couldn't sleep. It seemed that all my fears had come down on me at once. I had reached the saturation point. I got out of bed and I began to walk the floor. I had heard these things before, but for some reason that night it got me. I was frustrated and bewildered, and then I got up. And finally I went to the kitchen and heated a pot of coffee. With my cup of coffee sitting untouched before me, I began to think of a way to move out of the picture without appearing like a coward. I sat there and thought about a beautiful little daughter who had just been born. I'd come in night after night and seen that little gentle smile. I started thinking about a dedicated and loyal wife who was always there for me, but was over there asleep. And she'd be taken from me, or I could be taken from her. And I got to the point where I couldn't take it any longer. I was weak. Something said to me, you can't call on daddy now. You can't even call on mama. You've got to call on that something in that person that your daddy used to tell you about, that power that can make a way out of no way. And with my head in my hands, the words I spoke to God that midnight are still vivid in my memory. Lord, I'm down here trying to do what's right. I think I'm right. I'm here taking a stand for what I believe is right, but I must confess I'm weak. I'm faltering. If I lose my courage, if I'm afraid, I can't let the people see me like this. It seemed as though I could hear the quiet assurance of an inner voice saying, Martin Luther, stand up for righteousness. Stand up, Martin Luther, for justice. Stand up for truth. And lo, I will be with you even until the end of the world. King said, I tell you, I've seen the lightning flash. I've heard the thunder roar. I felt sin breakers dashing, trying to conquer my soul. But I heard the voice of Jesus saying to fight on. He promised never to leave me. And at that moment, I experienced the presence of the divine as though I have never experienced it before. Almost at once, my fear began to go and my uncertainty disappeared. And I was ready to face anything. Some of us in Selma got to see that kitchen table. And imagine the way King encountered God in that moment. King's family's house was bombed a few days later, and he and Coretta kept on marching. In fact, her father came to rescue her and baby Yoki and take them home. And she said, no, Daddy, I've got to stay with Martin, even in the face of death, marching toward justice, like Jesus, who in the face of death, amidst threats to his life, was willing to make a spectacle, to march that march into the city of Jerusalem, heralding a new kingdom, a kingdom not of this world, but a kingdom that would, in fact, transform the world. A kingdom in which the first are last, a kingdom in which power is shared, a kingdom where the vulnerable are protected, where resources are used such that everyone has enough. A kingdom where love means laying down your stuff, the stuff of your life, and being willing to change your mind and change your heart. A kingdom in which kindness guides our interactions. A kingdom where conversations are spirited but civil, where divergent perspectives are celebrated to make the world a better and more whole and healed place. These people are not a mob. These people are not a parade. These people, those people are marching into Jerusalem, marching into the city of peace, just like the people marched from Selma, which also means peace, to Montgomery, to make a whole. And middle family, this march still continues. We're marching now. We're marching now to build a bridge to personal wholeness and wellness. We're building a bridge to recovery and forgiveness and self-love and self-care. We're building a bridge among ethnicities and classes, a bridge to a new world in which clean water, clean air, food on your table, a place to work, good schools, good health care, and college are kind of like things you take for granted. We're building a bridge to a new normal where all of God's people are celebrated for who they are, no matter who they are, and no matter who they love, and no matter how they look, and no matter how they make a living. We're marching now to build a bridge from the world as it is to the world as it can be. So that when we pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, we understand it's a prophetic utterance, and we declare it to be true. We are building a bridge to freedom, to liberation, to the bold claim that everyone can be welcome not only inside these doors, but in this land of the free and the home of the brave, building a bridge to where borders are soft and porous. And a community of immigrants keeps welcoming a community of immigrants. We're building a bridge to the dream that is God's dream for us. A dream of reconciliation with the planet and with the creatures. A dream in which we are not hierarchical, but we are equal. A dream in which furry creatures and fish and streams and waters and human beings dance all around the earth as though she is our mother because she is. We are building a bridge as we march. We're building a bridge toward anti-violence. We're building a bridge where differences are not slugged out, but worked out. We are building a bridge from this incredible community of multiracial, multicultural, multi-everythingness to the world that we can create that looks even more like this than this, where children and seniors and men and women just collaborate and cooperate and celebrate to create a place of peace and shalom. And I'm going to tell you, the most important march we've got to take right now is the one to the voting booth. I don't get to tell you who to vote for, but I've got to tell you, if that craziness in the landscape makes us depressed and despondent and disgusted such that we stay home, then the powers of darkness win. I'm going to tell you that if we don't understand that our mothers and fathers and our forefathers and foremothers have died and bled so that we might have the opportunity to exercise our voice, we better get up and march to the polls. And that space where we feel powerless and unsure of what we can do, take one person to register. Tweet. Vota Latina, tweet, go to the polls. You can impact your circle of influence to make marching right now a holy act. There's much to say about violence. There's much to decry about the clash inside these spaces that are supposed to be about education and out on the streets. But I tell you, those ancient people were marching for hope. And I hope our march continues until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream, until all of God's people from every tribe and every nation stand together and sing in one voice, our God is a loving God, a good God. Till all of us, no matter who we love, no matter how we love them, no matter how we look, sing free at last, because in fact we are free at last. Amen.